Welcome to the world of British espionage, a top-secret world of smoke and mirrors. In this programme we uncover the black ops, the special operations our intelligence services want kept classified.
Now, I know the British government will say we don't assassinate people, we've never assassinated people. This is not true.
Once I saw a plan to assassinate Slobodan Milosevic, there were three sort of classic assassination scenarios, basically.
We expose the commando units brought in to do this dirty work.
MI6 recruited around 60 SAS agents to work alongside them in special operations.
We reveal when it comes to making friends, our intelligence agencies aren't particularly choosy.
It's quite clear and apparent that MI6 was involved with groups that were part of the Al-Qaeda network.
And we meet the intelligence service's biggest coup, the double agent at the heart of the KGB.
KGB knew nearly for sure that I was a British agent, and the KGB was playing with fire.
An increasing amount of the intelligence service's work is becoming public.
The head of MI5 warns publicly a dirty bomb attack on a western city is only a matter of time.
Three directors claim that MI5, MI6 knew all along what they were up to.
Also emerged today about government meetings with security officials like the head of MI6, Sir Richard Daley.
Street published a dossier from MI5 and MI6 which stated that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction.
However, there is still one area of their operations that remains top secret. Their black ops. The aptly named Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, carries out most of these special operations, ops that have little to do with spying.
Special operations are different to intelligence gathering. Intelligence gathering is passive, special operations are active.
MI6 uses black ops throughout the world to try and change the political status quo. And they have quite a menu of techniques.
This has included running coups, overthrowing governments, psychological operations, setting up black propaganda, and all those kind of things.
Understandably, the intelligence services are keen their activities remain anonymous.
MI6 works not entirely but largely overseas, and circumstances arise with MI6 where some of the things it does are deniable.
And to ensure these operations cannot be traced back to the intelligence services, they mainly contract out the work.
Contract agents are people who work directly for MI6 or MI5, and they may be involved in a number of operations, but at the end of the day, they're not direct officers, and for instance, they won't get pension rights and those kind of things.
Seconded from the British military, they become members of a very select and secret regiment, referred to internally as the Increment.
Any work that's dangerous, physically dangerous, is not undertaken by MI6, but is undertaken by the Increment.
Increment members are recruited from elite forces like the SAS, but they have to fit other bizarre criteria.
Often they were chosen because they didn't look like soldiers. They were either very, very small or very overweight, so they could pass themselves off in an airport without looking like a soldier. Then given further training by MI6, given training in disguise, in using false passports, in using false credit cards, that sort of thing.
And at a time of heightened terrorist threats, MI6 is keen to recruit new Increment members.
It's my understanding that MI6 sent a confidential letter out to approximately 100 members of the SAS, asking them to join the service, to work in certain areas across the globe where MI6 agents just couldn't function properly. And I understand MI6 recruited around 60 SAS agents.
The Middle East is undoubtedly the destination for this new unit. Details of their missions are strictly classified. To give a sense of what they will be doing, we need to look at the black ops carried out in Northern Ireland. Ops linked to the most infamous unit in the increment, Group 13.
Group 13, the word is bandied around and everybody raises their eyebrows because nobody's really quite sure what it was. But I have reason to believe that Group 13 consisted of individuals who had worked for intelligence in the past, about 12 men who were either former SAS members, serving SAS members, or people who had passed their SAS course but hadn't actually joined the regiment.
Group 13 were up against the 1970s terrorist warfare of the IRA. Operating undercover and apart from the army and the police, the group were a law unto themselves.
They bypassed the normal communication system of the army. They had some amazing equipment. They had radio sets that fastened to your body and you operated on a crystal switch in your palm. Personal radio sets with throat mics. They had little Ingram submachine guns, tiny little things which American gangsters were just using at that time.
But this equipment had been given to them for a specific task.
I know the British government will say we don't assassinate people, we've never assassinated people. This is not true. These units targeted people and in some cases knocked them off, assassinated them, killed them.
While details of Group 13's work in Northern Ireland remains classified, some black ops carried out in the province have now been exposed.
The longest criminal investigation in British history by the most senior UK police officer and the most devastating conclusions for the security services in Northern Ireland.
In 1989, Sir John Stevens was appointed to examine allegations that the intelligence agencies had colluded in assassinations.
The period from 73 through to about 1976 is very murky indeed. This is the period of dirty tricks, some of which are now beginning to surface. And there are various groups of victims of what went on in that period who are now releasing material. There was collusion with terrorist groups and the security agencies were involved in this.
Among the cases featured in the inquiry's report was the murder of Patrick Finucane. In February 1989, the Belfast lawyer was shot 14 times by loyalist gunmen. But the assassination was linked to an agent who worked for the RUC and fed information to MI5. The report concluded that the security services were clearly implicated in Finucane's death.
Sir John concluded that the murder was never properly investigated, despite police officers knowing who did it.
We have identified serious shortcomings highlighting collusion and the extreme of security force agents being involved in murder.
But MI5 and 6 haven't just been involved in the assassination of minor enemies. They are not beyond considering the elimination of much bigger fish. In October 2002, the White House hinted that when it came to the removal of Saddam Hussein, assassination was a serious option. Why go to war when one man and a gun could solve the problem?
To advocate from that podium that some Iraqis, person put a bullet in his head.
Regime change is welcome in whatever form that it takes.
So the answer is yes.
Thank you. Regime change is welcome in whatever form it takes.
Assassination has always been an option considered by the intelligence services.
2 years ago, the CIA removed legislation that stopped them conducting overseas assassinations. And the CIA have formed a special unit now that will purposely go out anywhere in the world and legally take out some of the terrorists. Whether MI6 do that is something you'll certainly have to ask them, but I think if they had an opportunity to remove a particular target, I think the events in Baghdad have clearly showed that we would do that. And I think possibly they may be involved in some sort of shadowy operation from time to time, though they would never admit that.
Details of any plans by MI6 to involve themselves in an assassination of the Iraqi leader remain top secret. But to find details of an MI6 assassination plan, you only have to go back a decade. In the early 1990s, Yugoslavia descended into a bloody civil war. At the heart of it was a hardline Serbian nationalist, Slobodan Milosevic. Publicly, Britain sought a diplomatic end to the war. Privately, the intelligence services were planning a dramatic end to Milosevic's warmongering.
Certainly once I saw a plan to assassinate Slobodan Milosevic, who was then president of Serbia.
Richard Tomlinson was a serving MI6 officer. He was working on the Balkans desk when he came across the plan to eliminate Milosevic.
The plot was very real. It was shown to me by a junior officer who had written it. I went down, I had to call into his office on other business, and he said to me, "Oh, what do you think of this?" And he threw across a sheet of paper, and I started reading it. And it was a proposal to assassinate Milosevic.
When Tomlinson published this revelation in a book, he breached the Official Secrets Act. He was forced into exile. Now he talks for the first time in detail about the 3 different options that were considered, each designed to ensure the permanent removal of Milosevic.
There were 3 sort of classic assassination scenarios, basically. One was to train up some of the Serbian resistance to carry out the assassination with a bomb, probably, at one of the rallies that Milosevic spoke at.
That plan was considered too risky. Too many things could go wrong. Plan 2 involved using one of their own to ensure the job was done right.
The second plan was to use the increment and use the people in the increment who were trained as snipers to attack Milosevic while he's at a public engagement.
But again, the plan was too public. The third option would ensure very few questions were asked. Milosevic's death would appear to be an accident.
The third plan was to kill Milosevic when he came out of the country, because at the time he was travelling regularly out of Serbia to attend a series of conferences, and most of them were held in Geneva.
President, are you here to do final push for Geneva?
There was a proposal to attack his car while it was passing through one of the tunnels in Geneva, using a strobe to disorient the driver of his car. The strobe was a very, very bright flashing light, bright enough to temporarily blind someone. This would cause his car to crash, and because of proximity of concrete in a tunnel, the accident would be probably serious enough to kill him. The other advantage of in a tunnel is that there's no witnesses.
The exact reasons why the plans were never implemented remain top secret. But in the end, they were no longer needed.
Just before dawn, a convoy of vehicles took the man who ruled Yugoslavia for 13 years out of the presidential complex and on his way to prison.
Your views about
In 2002, Milosevic was put on trial for his war crimes. The removal of Milosevic ensured the fall of his ruling elite. Yet the elimination of one person doesn't always work. The old regime can simply regroup behind another leader. This poses a different, much larger problem for the intelligence services. If Britain doesn't like a foreign regime, One option is to get MI6 to try and remove it. Regime change has always been one of the black ops given to our foreign intelligence service by the government. But now it seems everyone has been let in on this state secret.
My administration still supports regime change. There's all kinds of ways to change regimes.
In 2003, war offered a very public solution to the perceived need for a total regime change in Iraq. But behind the scenes, MI6 had been secretly working on the overthrow of Saddam Hussein since the early 1990s. It was no easy task.
Where the regime has been strong-willed, it's very difficult to overthrow that regime. We can tie this into events in Iraq. Over the last 10 years, Saddam Hussein has been determined to cling to power.
To instigate complete regime change, you need an alternative government. MI6's role is to work secretly with resistance groups to try and create one. This also wasn't easy in Iraq.
Throughout MI6's operations, this has been one of the major problems. They haven't been able to set up an exile government, a suitable group of politicians which would be acceptable to the population.
When you're trying to change a regime, it's vital to make friends with the opposition. But MI6 has a bad track record when it comes to choosing the right friends. 20 years before the Iraq War, MI6 attempted another regime change in the Middle East. This time the country was Iran. When war broke out between Iran and its neighbor, MI6 had the perfect chance to help remove the country's radical Islamic regime. All they had to do was help the other side. But the other side was Iraq.
We were faced with a great dilemma as who was the worst of the powers fighting the Iran-Iraq war. And at the time, remember it was the period of Ayatollah Khomeini, it was thought that by a narrow margin, the Iranians were more dangerous.
The Ayatollah and his radical Islamic regime were considered to be a greater threat to Western interests than Iraq's nationalistic dictator, Saddam Hussein. So, to try and get a regime change in Iran, MI6 gave a helping hand to Iraq.
Certainly some help was given to them in the way of intelligence and in fields related to that, security.
To help Iraq win the war, British intelligence taught Saddam how to spy on his enemies. They gave him access to our spying technology. But even with Western help, Iraq could not defeat Iran. In the end, it was the UN who settled the dispute.
Nobody more pleased than the Secretary-General himself, about to make history by calling on both sides in the war to stop fighting.
To discontinue all military action on land, at sea, and in the air.
The Ayatollah held on to power in Iran. And within a few years, it was Saddam who became enemy number one. An enemy who could now protect his secrets with British technology and know-how.
One of the effects was that their communications became more secure, and so it was more difficult to read their intentions. It was extremely difficult to get valuable, reliable information from inside Iraq.
The map of friendly versus unfriendly countries is always changing. It's a hazard of the job for MI6 when it tries to set up regime change. So, the Secret Intelligence Service, SIS, finds itself deliberately making friends with a potential enemy. It happens when, for a while, they share a common fight. Afghanistan in the 1980s was under Soviet occupation. the Secret Intelligence Service became actively involved in arming and training the Mujahideen, the anti-Russian resistance movement.
We thought the Russians had no business in Afghanistan, and that it was incumbent on us to show that. And if we could help what was a natural growth of resistance movement there, then we were doing the right thing.
MI6 supplied small arms, they supplied money, principally they supplied radio equipment, Rakal radio transmitters. There was also a period when they were supplying blowpipe missiles.
But this had to remain a black op. The Islamic Mujahideen had links to known anti-Western terrorist groups.
Once SIS was authorised to actively involve itself inside Afghanistan, obviously it was a very sensitive matter. The numbers involved were very small. There were only 2 or 3 people who went in each time to do the training.
With the help of MI6, the Mujahideen won the battle for Afghanistan. But the intelligence service's work here would come back to haunt them.
But at the end of the campaign, what do you do with all these guerrillas that have been recruited and are highly trained? You have thousands of guerrillas in Afghanistan, nowhere to go.
But some of these guerrillas did have somewhere to go. They already had links with Islamic terrorist groups elsewhere.
It's quite clear and apparent that MI6 was involved, to what degree we do not know, but certainly was involved to some extent with groups that were part of the Al-Qaeda network.
But this is definitely something MI6 won't talk about.
If there is an investigation, it might start to unravel. Which other groups, which other individuals were MI6 in touch with? Which groups were they funding, supplying information with, who were part of the Al-Qaeda network?
The Afghan rebels who joined Al-Qaeda are no longer Britain's friends. But some of them can still be of use to find out what goes on inside the terrorist organization.
Once you get really good inside intelligence about any group, you are able to learn what the levers of power are and what each man fears from another, and what each man is capable, will credit another man with being capable of doing. It's all a matter of inside knowledge.
This insider knowledge, designed to divide and rule Al-Qaeda, was honed during 20 years of special operations in Northern Ireland. In the early 1970s, the intelligence services weren't just involved in assassination in Northern Ireland. They were also infiltrating the terrorist networks.
MI6 has been involved in what are known as disruptive operations. One of the techniques that they use is to put one group against another to disrupt what they're involved in.
And of course, the whole idea is to try and create as much confusion as possible so that people are not quite sure what to believe.
You set people very discreetly against one another.
Right.
They destroy each other.
Right, they do.
You don't destroy them. What a pity that so-and-so is so indiscreet. Not much more. Of course, there are much more sophisticated operations than that, but that's roughly the sort of thing.
What kind of sophisticated operations?
Ah, that I couldn't possibly tell you.
What we do know is that the key to disruptive action is to work from the inside.
MI6 placed a number of agents within Ireland and the North with the idea of infiltrating the IRA.
And that infiltration goes higher and deeper than you would think.
British intelligence has been very strong in Northern Ireland. There is no question that the IRA and possibly Sinn Féin as well has been infiltrated, possibly almost right up to its senior levels.
In the 1970s, the intelligence services started to infiltrate the IRA. By the 1980s, they had achieved huge success, with 5 high-level informers on the inside. One has become famous. His code name, Steak Knife.
3 British Prime Ministers would have seen his intelligence, a supergrass in the fight against terror, accused tonight of killing innocent people and fellow informers to protect his own identity.
He'd risen through violence to the highest level within the IRA, but he was also a British agent whose information was critical to the intelligence service's dirty war against the paramilitaries.
Steak Knife held hugely powerful positions at the very heart of IRA operations. He was regarded by the British military as the jewel in the crown of its network of agents in Northern Ireland.
Steak Knife gave British intelligence details of a great many terrorist operations, leading to a succession of arrests. He also preempted some attacks. In 1988, he gave a precise schedule of an IRA bombing mission to Gibraltar. The result, 3 terrorists were shot and killed when they were ambushed by the SAS. But not all British recruits have been as reliable as Steak Knife.
MI6 engaged in what appeared to be cowboy operations. They recruited a number of low-level operatives, including the notorious Little John brothers.
Even in the world of espionage, the Little Johns were 2 very unusual contract agents.
Little Johns were, I think it's acknowledged generally, petty criminals. These 2 characters were basically then used to try to infiltrate the IRA.
Once inside the IRA, and on the instructions of MI6, the Little Johns carried out a series of bank robberies in Southern Ireland.
The idea appears to have been to put the blame on the provisionals and so upset Southern Ireland, which would then introduce more severe legislation against the IRA.
On the 12th of October 1972, the brothers carried out the biggest bank robbery in Irish history. They took £67,000 from a branch of the Allied Irish Bank in Dublin. But things hadn't gone according to plan, and half the Little John's gang had run away during the armed raid.
They carried out a bank robbery. They really bungled a bank robbery.
The Little Johns fled to the UK, but a trail of clues led straight to the brothers. Once under arrest, the Little Johns felt they had no option but to tell the police they worked for MI6.
The agreement was that if I got back to England, I would be safe. If I was caught in Ireland, then I was on my own. Well, I got back to England. It was the British that betrayed me. The British sent us back to Ireland.
And then, of course, the whole thing suddenly became a major story in the press.
MI6 were publicly exposed. Their use of petty criminals and the revelation they had condoned a bank robbery caused them acute embarrassment. The Little John episode forced the intelligence service to ask itself if this really was the best way to protect British interests.
It's still not completely clear what MI6 was up to when they recruited people like the Little John brothers. What we do know, though, is shortly after MI6 closed down its Special Political Action Group, people engaged in operations which could go badly wrong, such as the Little Johns, and which would give bad publicity, and that the trail would lead back to MI6.
MI6 may be more careful now who they use, but getting your dirty work done by someone else is still key to most black ops. It's true for the government as much as the intelligence services.
I think there are from time to time cases where you want to test whether somebody who may be quite dangerous is really dedicated to disrupting your country's interests, or whether they can be brought round by money, by offers of one kind or another, by recognition of one kind or another. And in those circumstances, your intelligence service is available to do that.
Persuading people to do what Britain wants has been the aim behind many of the intelligence service's black ops. Gathering incriminating evidence can prove vital to ensuring a change of mind. The clearest case occurred 40 years ago when the British faced an intransigent archbishop in Cyprus. Cyprus in the late 1950s was a British colony with a divided population of fiercely nationalistic Greeks and Turks. Britain wanted out, leaving the island independent. But the Greek leader, Archbishop Makarios, wanted Cyprus to become part of Greece.
Makarios was a hardliner. He was in contact with the terrorists who wanted union with Greece. And during negotiations it became clear that Makarios wasn't going to compromise. MI5, MI6 were running an operation and they were keeping Makarios under surveillance. And it's said that during this surveillance they came across compromising material, that Makarios was involved in a homosexual relationship, it appears, with a young boy.
In February 1959, Greek, Turkish and British leaders convened in London to sign an independence agreement. At the 11th hour, Makarios withheld his signature, demanding Cyprus be unified with Greece. Yet within hours, he had inexplicably changed his mind.
During discussions, it was hinted that material that they had in their possession might be used to compromise him. And it seems that after that, Makarios became much more pliable, and negotiations eventually were concluded. An agreement was made between Britain and Cyprus.
Makarios signed the agreement and was elected President of the new Republic of Cyprus. Knowing your enemy's secrets can give you the upper hand. The intelligence services need to gain access to places and people that provide such information. Therefore, the ideal spy needs to travel all over the world without attracting attention. Just like a businessman.
My name's Mark Gutteridge. I was assisting the intelligence services from approximately 1979 to 1991.
Mark Gutteridge is typical of the businessman spies who gather information for the secret services. Their information on arms contracts and sales invoices proves invaluable to our intelligence gathering. A successful salesman working for a company in Coventry with international links, in 1979, Mark had also just embarked on a second successful career working for MI5.
My first contact was with a man called Barry. He never actually said he was from MI5, but I mean, you knew. I suppose when they said to me that everything that we talked about was covered by the Official Secrets Act, I suppose that was the first time I really knew for sure who they were.
MI5 had chosen Mark because he had business connections with the Russian trade delegation in London. They wanted to know what the Russians were up to. And when he started to travel to Eastern Europe, he then became of interest to the Foreign Intelligence Service, MI6.
I was travelling 6 to 8 months of the year at that time to Eastern Europe, mainly Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. I was asked if I would meet somebody. I think the word used was from our sister company. I'm not too sure, actually. So I just assumed then that must be MI6.
Mark's job already allowed him to visit countries MI6 found hard to access. Then In 1987, Mark's company secured an £18 million deal to supply machinery to Iraq. This was of special interest to MI6.
As soon as I mentioned this on a debrief to do with the Soviet Union, their eyes lit up. And from then on, it seemed as though the emphasis had gone off Russia and Eastern Europe and bang, focused straight onto Iraq, and they were very interested. And they wanted to know who we'd met, what components they were producing, which factories visited, locations, you know, how many miles from Baghdad, north, east, or wherever.
As Mark's business trips to Iraq increased, so did the frequency of his debriefings with MI6.
We always used to meet in one of the hotels in Coventry. To start with, I think we used to meet about once every 2 months. They tended to increase in frequency after that, say to about once every month.
Mark was asked to report on factories in Iraq where weapons might be made. But he was never officially employed by MI5 or 6, and he received no payment for his work.
I just felt I was doing my little bit for the country. No payment was ever offered, no payment was ever asked for. I just felt I was doing my little bit. I certainly didn't see myself as a spy. In fact, I don't like that word.
But in 1990, Mark's spying career was cut short. Matrix Churchill was accused of selling illegal munitions parts to the Iraqis.
It's over 2 years since Matrix Churchill was first investigated for allegedly illegally exporting to Iraq machine tools designed to make fuses for shells.
To try and get his company off the hook, Mark revealed he had been working for the intelligence services.
Mark Gutteridge says he told MI5 in May 1987 that Habobi was buying machines specifically to make arms.
Once public, Mark's revelation, combined with ministers' admissions that they knew what was going on, caused the case to collapse.
Outside the Old Bailey, champagne for the 3 company directors as they celebrated the withdrawal of all charges against them.
We never hid the fact that the machine tools were going to go into an industry that would make munition components. And I believed right from the beginning that the government knew and the government approved the sale of the machine tools.
But the case wasn't the only thing dropped. His activities now public knowledge, Mark could no longer spy for Her Majesty's Secret Service.
I had a meeting with an officer from MI6 who made it perfectly clear to me that he wanted our meetings to be historical. Those are the words he used. If I was ever approached again, I think I would. I would do the same thing again. I can't imagine that's ever going to happen.
There are plenty of Mark Gutteridges out there happy to do their bit. The intelligence services can afford to drop a few along the way. But some spies are far too valuable for the intelligence services to lose. They are the double agents. Double agents are the most important type of spy. MI5 and 6 will be attempting to recruit double agents in the Middle East. When, in 1985, Moscow needed to appoint a new KGB head of station in London, MI6 saw their chance to put a double agent in at the very top of Russia's spying operations.
Well, having an agent in place in the legal residency in London is hugely important, obviously, because he can tell the security service many of the things which otherwise they're going to have to spend a great deal of investigative time trying to find out.
MI6's choice for top job was Oleg Gordievsky, a KGB officer already based in London.
He was recruited by a British intelligence officer. And for the next 11 years, he worked as a British agent at the heart of the KGB, giving us an unparalleled insight into not simply KGB operations, but the mindset which informed those operations.
For a decade, Gordievsky had passed details of Russian spying operations to the West, exposing their network of KGB agents in the UK. But in 1985, there was a chance for him to access even more secrets.
The British decided that they would like to extend the intelligence gathering capabilities of Gordievsky. In other words, they wanted him moved up to a higher position in order to enable him to have access to more secret, valuable information. The way to do this was to remove the people above Gordievsky and make it impossible for them to be replaced, so that he would be in there.
The plan was simple. Moscow needed a work visa for any new KGB man they sent to London. All MI6 needed to do was refuse all these visas.
The first one they got rid of was Arkady Guk, who was the incumbent resident agent. Moscow wanted to send a replacement for Guk, but he was not given a visa. This was the so-called visa wars. To cut a long story short, they did not succeed in sending a replacement.
But MI6 chose that moment to renew Gordievsky's visa. This made the KGB suspicious.
They thought, something is not right. It's not right. They're bound to know that he is an intelligence officer. Why did they grant visa to him?
The KGB had no proof that Gordievsky was a double agent, so made him their senior spy in London. But not for long.
At the end of April, the KGB knew nearly for sure that I was a British agent. And the KGB was playing with fire. They were keeping a British spy agent as head of station for about 16 days. And first on the 17th day, they sent a telegram to me. Come immediately to Moscow for important consultations. And so it was the end of it.
Unaware he had been exposed, Gordievsky returned to KGB headquarters in Moscow, where he was interrogated. He admitted nothing and was released. But the clock was ticking. Either he escaped or eventually he would be shot as a spy.
He was under daily surveillance, continuous surveillance by the KGB. And that means 20 or 30 people following him.
The Soviet Union was in one big concentration camp. Impossible to escape.
But in the tradition of all fictional spies, Gordievsky had an escape plan.
The way he shook off his surveillance was completely brilliant.
He went out early as if he was going for a run, where there is that piece of woodland.
They can't run in the woods not knowing in which direction. So I ran very quickly. At that time I was a great jogger. And soon I was 2 kilometers away from them. Then I went on a bus, then on another bus, then on a tram, then underground, changing lines in the underground, and arriving at the square. There is in Moscow a very famous square of 3 huge railway stations in 3 absolutely different directions. And there I had a ticket to Leningrad.
Gordievsky made it to Leningrad, and from there he headed towards the Finnish border, where he was to rendezvous with MI6 agents. They would smuggle him across the border in the boot of their car.
We went to the border, checkpoint 5 times. At one point, I heard the voices and dogs, the KGB dogs nearby, sniffing. Some checks, 5 stops, very nerve-wracking. Then they started to drive. And they put a cassette into the tape, in the cassette tape player. And it was Sibelius. Sibelius is Finlandia. I knew I was free and safe.
Once Gordievsky was safe in the West, MI6 couldn't wait to tell the world about this top-secret double agent.
Although I was one of 5 directors of the service, I did not know that Gordievsky existed until he actually escaped.
Any defector like that, a senior defector, raises the morale, and he was a big coup.
The intelligence services have had their fair share of coups in nearly 100 years of existence. But they are the first to admit the job is getting harder. The enemies they face have changed. The technology they used, and that is used by these enemies, has expanded.
The ability to gather information has exceeded our wildest beliefs years ago.
No one in their senses thought that we were going to move into a completely serene and safe world, and wherever there are dangers, you want to be able to know about them and anticipate them.
In many ways, the world has now become a much more dangerous place, and the only way in which you can protect yourself is you must have, if you can, intelligence in advance of what the threats and what the attacks may be.
There is a huge operation going on. It is a most secret war, and it's a war that the public are not privy to. And the only time that the public will be privy to it, unfortunately, is when something happens.
Failure in this intelligence war may mean another 9/11. Success will be less obvious. Not every foiled terrorist attack makes the headlines. But that's the future, and at the moment, it's classified.
Tomorrow at 7, German military intelligence during World War II. Next today, another collection of engineering disasters.